The biggest event of the year, US Nationals 2006. I don't think it gets much bigger and better than this. And this event fully got taken over by a deck that no one saw coming, that was only made a few days before. And quite honestly, it could be argued that this was the most successful rogue deck in Pokemon history. In an era where information wasn't as easy to get hold of, one testing group targeted the meta in such a destructive way that their rogue creation ended up meeting itself in the final, making a mockery of the event, all with cards that most of the player base haven't even heard of. Here's the story of the greatest upset in Pokemon TCG history. The metagame in the run-up to US Nationals 2006 was pretty wide open, but there was definitely a standout best deck in format, Blastoise EX. Blastoise had the Pokepower Energy Rain that let you attach as many water energy as you liked from your hand to your Pokemon in a single turn, but you would have to put one damage counter on the Pokemon that received the energy. Sounds familiar, eh? The attack was also usable, dealing 80 damage, and you flip a coin until you get tails. For each heads, you would discard an energy attached to your opponent's active. Not bad, not great, but usable. Blastoise CX wasn't the main attacker, of course. Instead, that honor goes to the majestic Lugia EX. What a stunning card, and 100 HP basic Pokemon with the Pokebody Silver Sparkle, which would activate whenever Lugia would take damage. You would flip a coin, and if heads, you would discard an energy attached to your opponent's active. Not a bad body to have. The attack was the star of the show though. Elemental Blast basically reads, KO your opponent's Pokemon, and discard all energy attached to Lugia. This would make Lugia a deadly beatstick that had no problems in constantly KOing whatever was in its way, turn after turn after turn. But how was we refueling Lugia? Because that attack cost looks gnarly and Blastoise can only accelerate water energy. Well, that's where the Holon Pokemon came in. The Holon region was introduced and only explored in the Pokemon TCG, and it is the only place where the unusual Delta species Pokemon would reside. The region was previously uninhabited by humans, but researchers wanted to investigate the region's strange energy emitted by some power spots. Sounds a bit like Galar, no? Initial researchers constructed a large tower in the middle of the forest, and the electromagnetic waves from that tower transformed the local Pokemon into having different typing than what they would normally have. These Pokemon were known as the Delta species, and the researchers weren't done there though, because through further investigations they discovered a new power, and this power resulted in Holon Pokemon. And it's these Holon and Delta Pokemon that we are interested in here today. Since the Holon Pokemon in the TCG could attach themselves to a Pokemon that already had an energy attached. And while the previous energy did have to get returned to the hand, the Holon Pokemon would now count for one or two different types of energy at the same time. This was amazing for powering up awkward attack costs like Elemental Blast. And when paired with Energy Rain, you could then attach a water energy from your hand to your Lugia, then attach a Holon's cast form, returning that water energy. And all you have to do is just attach that water energy again, and bang! Elemental Blast could be used in a single turn. And you could just keep reloading this cycle over and over. But just in case blowing up the active with Lugia wasn't enough for you though, we do have Steelix EX. Steelix EX was a huge 150 HP monster with the attack Mudslide, which for 2 fighting energy, or 1 Holon Pokemon of course, and 2 colorless energy, or 2 water of course, you could discard the Holon Pokemon and then do an 100 damage snipe to any one of your opponent's Pokemon. Fantastic for picking up miss KOs or taking out bench sitters like Jirachi, which this deck would play funnily enough, as it would let you look at the top 4 cards of your deck when Jirachi was in the active, and then you take one and put it in your hand, very nice. But Mudslide could also KO Mew EX, which went on to win the 2006 World Championships a month later, might I say. But most importantly, Mudslide would KO the format's biggest staple, Pidgeot. Pidgeot was played in a ton of decks, and for good reason. It was a one-prize Pokemon with the quick search power, which would let you grab any card you like from your deck once per turn. This would give you unparalleled levels of consistency, so as you can imagine this was played a lot, but it's also led to a lot of players that didn't like Pidgeot, so they were trying their hardest to counter it, with cards like Battle Frontier, or even a whole deck like Solrock Lunatone. The main attacker in this deck was this Lunatone, Target Beam would add up nicely, dealing 20 damage plus 10 for each Solrock you had in play. Very efficient at the time. The best bit was though, there was a whole suite of other Solrock and Lunatone cards that would all combo off each other. For example, this Lunatone had Soul Shade, which would turn off all fire Pokemon powers apart from EX, which is very nice actually, and it would be useful against the disruptive Houndoom that would stop you playing trainers if you had more Pokemon in play than the Houndoom player. Bit scary. Solrock Lunatone players didn't have to worry about that Houndoom. This Solrock would boost your Lunatone's HP to 80. Very nice. And it could attack too, dealing 10 damage for each Lunatone you had in play to any one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. And lastly, this Solrock would turn off all colorless Pokemon powers as long as you had a Lunatone in play, which you always would, let's be honest. And it was that Solrock right there that would stop Pidgeot, and it also stopped Lugia EX for what it's worth. And since this deck plays so little Pokemon, you could play a ton of disruption cards like Energy Removal 2. This deck would end up winning Worlds a month later too, but in the senior division. We mentioned Mew EX earlier, and that was a deck that would go on to win the 2006 World Championships a month later in August. It revolved around Mew EX, who could use the attack of any one of your Pokemon in play. So most of the time you'd want to copy Manectric EX's Disconnect attack, since it would lock your opponent from playing trainer cards. This meant you could permanently lock in Battle Frontier as long as Disconnect kept on getting used, and this would then turn off Pidgeot. Or you could lock in Cursed Stone, that would put 1 damage on all Pokemon in play that have a Poke Power. This would bolster Disconnect's output a lot. This deck was very strong, and it would play a multitude of different Pokemon, like Deoxys EX, Regirock EX, all for different situations. So as you can see, the 2006 metagame had a ton of different decks that were all doing slightly different things well. But wait, we have some more fun ones to look at now. Dragtrode was one of the heaviest hitting decks in the format. Dark Electrode would accelerate energy to itself via its Poke Power Darkness Navigation. Dark Dragonite would move around Dark Energy via its Dark Trance Poke Power. And Rocket Sneasel would be a huge beat stick, with its Dark Ring attack having no problems ejecting anything in the format, dealing 30 plus 10 for each Dark Pokemon you had in play. And Rocket Cypher EX would allow you to hit for Dark and Grass typing at the same time. Both of these heavy hitters could boost their damage too via Rocket Energy or Special Darkness Energy, both of which would boost damage by 10 for each one attached. But the last deck I want to look at though is Rocklock, and boy this deck was hefty. The build around was this Mammoth Dark Tyranitar card, whose sand damage body would put 1 damage on all your opponent's bench basic Pokemon in between turns, if Tyranitar was in the active. Second Strike would also come in useful to be fair, dealing 50 plus 20 if the defending Pokemon had 20 damage or more on it already, hitting pretty hard. This however wasn't the main game plan though, since Tyranitar had a running mate in Dark Ampharos. Dark Ampharos had the Darkest Impulse body that would activate whenever your opponent would evolve their Pokemon, by putting 20 damage on that Pokemon after it evolved. So if you was a basic deck, you would get clopped by Tyranitar, which isn't very fun. And if you evolved up, you would get clopped by Ampharos. What was you meant to do? But somehow it would get worse, because they had Ancient Machine Rock, which would de-evolve all your opponent's Pokemon by 1 stage, which would then force them to be in sand damage range obviously. And then if you evolved again, you would reactivate Dark Ampharos. Honestly, this would get out of hand quite fast. You could even utilize Rocket's Tricky Gym, which would give all your Dark or Rocket Pokemon access to the attack Feint Attack, which would deal a 20 damage snipe, which would actually come in very handy for picking up missed KOs. There were some other cool decks like Ariados Flareon, where Ariados would do more damage depending on the amount of special conditions your opponent had, and Flareon would inflict such said special conditions. There was Meta Knight, where Metagross would hit like an absolute truck, and Dragonite would accelerate energy. But we haven't got time to look at them in detail, since now it's time to see how the testing group would combat this very wide and diverse metagame. They started off by analysing the meta, and it seemed like it was extremely weak to spread damage. And while Dark Tyranitar was good with Ampharos, it relied on getting multiple stage 2s into play, so the group really didn't want to play that. So with that in mind, they started to look at what spread Pokemon there was in format that really haven't been explored yet. There was rumblings of Delta Marowak being quite the anti-meta card that fits this description nicely. Energy Bone would deal 20 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon for each energy you had attached to the Marowak. So if you had the base 2 energy attached for Energy Bone, you were dealing 20 damage to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon. That's pretty cool. If you had 3 energy, you could pick 3. So if you had a ton of energy, you could start to throw around a lot of damage. This had a stupidly high damage ceiling, capable of slamming 120 damage into play via one attack, which was absolutely unfathomable at the time. But the problem was, it was hard to get all those energy attached and keep them attached, since the Marowak only had 80 HP. So if you piled on all those energy onto Marowak, there was a very good chance you were just immediately going to get KO'd. So Marowak got shelved pretty much, but the group did like Marowak's lesser known partner, Raichu. Delta Raichu was one of the types changed Pokemon from the Hoenn region, since this Raichu was now a metal type. That wasn't important though. What was important is its Zap attack, which would deal 20 damage to any Pokemon in play that had a Poke Power or Poke Body. And if we cast our minds back to the 2006 metagame run-through that we just had, that catches a lot of the format, right? All on the stage 1 that attacked for 1 energy. Now, to be fair, this was more situational than Marowak, but it was so much easier to maintain. And the difference between attacking for 1 energy instead of 2 was immense. The group were very happy with Raichu, and they settled on it being the build around, because Zap plus Cursed Stone pile on damage at a crazy rate, really applying the pressure on the meta game. But as the group tested it, they realised that Raichu needed a partner, because without one, your opponent could just play around Raichu by not benching a lot and just punching the active for big damage turn after turn after turn. The problem is though, that Zap would damage your own Pokemon if they had a Poke Power or a Poke Body. So that unfortunately ruled out a ton of Pokemon immediately, since you really didn't want to be damaging your own Pokemon. And ideally, the group wanted a fighting type, because that was a good type to hit for at the time, slapping Rocket Sneasel, Electric EX for weakness. So they looked and looked and looked and looked, and they eventually found a partner, to be fair, one that ticked all the boxes, and one that no one else had really looked into before, Delta Exeggutor. Delta Exeggutor really meant business. No Poke Power or Poke Body, so Zap wasn't an issue. A stage 1 Pokemon with 80 HP was nice, but the selling point was Delta Circle. For 2 energy, you would deal 10 plus 10 for each Delta Pokemon you had in play. And since Raichu, Pikachu, Exeggutor, and Execute were all Delta Pokemon, this had no problems hitting for the maximum 70 damage regularly. This also made Hollon's Castform a crazy new partner too. The group really wanted to test out using Castform not just for its energy attaching power, but for its attack too, because Delta Draw was nuts, letting you draw up to the amount of Delta Pokemon you had in play. This was perfect for the early game, allowing you to get all your basics into play fast, or find your Cursed Stones for example. And since Execute was a Delta Pokemon too, whereas Cubone wasn't, this made Exeggutor even better when you factor in Hollon's Castform. Delta Circle was just great for providing some huge get out of the way power if your opponent was trying to play around Zap by not benching much, because now Delta Circle would just slap them in the active for a ton of damage. But somehow it didn't stop there though for Exeggutor, because it wasn't just good for punching the active, because Split Bomb would combo absurdly well with Zap, dealing 30 damage to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon, often letting you wrap up games in a major way. And with the group opting to play a full 4 copies of Castform and 1 Magnemite, they had a ton of energy acceleration, as well as 3 Scramble energy and double Rainbow energy. So, the group was very happy with the deck, but they had one more matchup they wanted to shore up, and that was Mulock. This deck would look to use Wobbuffet stage of Evolution Body to lock a Pokemon in the active, and then wear your resources down with cards like Power Hand Extension. And then when you was eventually out of resources, they would start to copy Jinx's Pure Power to dissect your board. Scary deck. In order to combat this, the group ran the stunning Delta Lati twins, who had the dual aura bodies, which would turn off evolved Pokemon's bodies as long as they were both in play. This would also stop Dark Tyranitar and Dark Ampharos too, which is pretty nice. The group was now set on the core cards, but with the event only being a few days away now, they really didn't have massive amounts of time to test. So they went to the event with a deck list, by their own words, that wasn't terribly optimized or refined. Did that matter though? Well, no. Not really, because the deck ran through the field like a hot knife through butter, with the deck doing the unthinkable, matching itself in the finals where Martin managed to take the whole event home, not losing a single round on the way, going fully undefeated. Absolutely incredible. The group told me that their opponents had no clue what was going on when they were playing against it, meaning they were making massive mistakes which the group capitalized on, leading to one of the greatest upsets in Pokemon TCG history. I need to give a massive shout out and love to Kyle Puka Sukovic for providing me the information for this video, as he was actually part of the testing group that helped build this monster. I find it mad how Puka was one of the reasons why I got into the competitive Pokemon TCG scene in the first place, and now he's helping me with videos. To be honest, I feel really blessed. Although it is worth noting that while Martin is the focal point and the sort of champion of our story, unfortunately he has since been banned, although I don't actually know why, so yeah, take of that what you will. Real quick, I have to give a shout out to this video sponsor, Dragon Shield. They make the best accessories in the game, and if you want to get your hands on some and save yourself some money, click the link down there and use my code BERT to get 5% off, and it helps me out too. Let's get back to the video. If you like the video, well, you like the video, and why don't you watch this video here, where we look at the budget card that changed Pokemon forever.